Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
If you'd told me 10 years ago that my biggest political scandal wouldn't come from a budget crisis or a zoning fight, but from my own living room, I'd have laughed you right out of City Hall. Small-town mayors don't have scandals, I would have said. We have potholes and bake sales. Shows what I knew. My name is Frank Daniels. I'm 52, three-term mayor of a little Midwestern town with more churches than stoplights and a population that can still fit in the high school gym if everybody squeezes. We've got one real diner, 3 hair salons, 2 auto shops, and a Walmart on the edge of town we pretend not to go to while everyone's car is parked out front. In other words, this is the kind of place where everybody knows what brand of cereal you buy, who cuts your lawn, and how many times you've forgotten to return your library books. Privacy's more of a suggestion than a right. I grew up here. My dad ran the hardware store until his knees gave out. My mom taught second grade and could still recite the names of every one of her kids, even when they're pushing 50. I was supposed to take over the store. Instead, I found myself running for mayor because I got tired of complaining about the same broken sidewalks and decided maybe I should be the idiot in charge of fixing them. And for a while, I wasn't half bad at it. We paved, we patched what we paved. We balanced budgets, kept the lights on, kept the cops and firefighters paid, argued about parking minimums and Christmas decorations, all the glamorous stuff. I shook hands, cut ribbons, went to more Eagle Scout ceremonies than any one man should, and somewhere in there people started calling me Mayor Daniels like it wasn't just Frankie who used to mow their lawn. Through all of it, I believed I had one secret weapon, my wife, Rachel. If you've never seen Rachel work a room, you're missing out. She's 5'5" of hairspray and charm, with a laugh that makes people turn their heads and a talent for remembering names that borders on supernatural. We met when she was doing PR for a regional supermarket chain and I was the guy in a short tie trying to convince the city council to let them build on the old fairgrounds. She stood up during public comment and said, "Our company cares deeply about this community," and I thought, I don't know if that's true, but I care deeply about you. We got married 2 years later in the Methodist Church on Maple Street with a potluck reception in the fellowship hall. She did the centerpieces, of course. Little mason jars with wildflowers and miniature American flags. We danced to an 80s ballad the DJ swore was timeless. People cried. My mother whispered, "She's going to be your secret weapon," which is not a normal thing for a mom to say at a wedding, but in hindsight, pretty on brand. Rachel loved campaigns. Not politics, exactly, she didn't care about policy minutiae or municipal bonds, but the show of it. The signs, the slogans, the colors, the story. Voters aren't just picking a person, she'd say, they're picking a feeling. We have to give them one. The first time I ran, she basically handcrafted my image from scratch. New suits, new glasses, new down-to-earth but not sloppy haircut. She ordered yard signs, redesigned my logo, coached me on what to do with my hands when I talked so I didn't look like a malfunctioning traffic cone. She managed my Facebook page before anyone else in town knew what a page was. "Smile with your eyes, not just your teeth," she'd say, taking 100 photos until one didn't make me look constipated. "And stop saying folks every other word. You sound like a parody." We won that first race by 8 points. I credited my deep love of the community and a strong ground game. Rachel credited framing and font choice. She wasn't entirely wrong. Over the next 2 terms, Mayor Daniels and Rachel became a package deal. She stood next to me at every groundbreaking, every ribbon cutting, every pancake breakfast. People started calling her our First Lady, half kidding, half not. She'd wave it off and then go home and tweak my stump speech. "She's your secret sauce," my chief of staff, Tyler, would say. "You're the meatloaf, she's the ketchup." "Appreciate that," I'd say. Real confidence booster. By the time my third term was winding down and the question of running again started buzzing around like a fly you can't swat, it felt automatic that we'd do it together. "Fourth term?" Rachel said one night at the kitchen table, looking over poll numbers like they were a menu. "I don't know," I said. "People get tired. They might want someone new." She snorted. "You are someone new," she said. You're the seasoned statesman now instead of the fresh face. We can work with that. Let's do one more. Go out on top. I should have asked what on top meant to her. I didn't. We filed. We launched. We ordered new signs, "Keep Frank working for US, not my idea." Rachel redesigned the website, lined up a photographer, ordered a truckload of campaign merch nobody asked for, hats, stickers, even koozies. "You can't lose in a koozie," she said. She also brought in him. "Frank, meet Josh," she said one afternoon, ushering a guy into my office. Late 30s, slim, perfectly trimmed beard, suit that was definitely not from the mall. Josh is a political consultant. He's worked on statewide campaigns. He's going to help us take this to the next level. I stood up, shook his hand. "Next level of what?" I asked. "We're a town of 18,000. Josh flashed a practiced smile. "Every race matters, Mayor," he said. "Local is where the narrative begins. Your story can inspire beyond this town." "I just want to fill the potholes on Jefferson and keep the library open," I said. "Exactly," he replied. "That's your authenticity. We can package that." That should have been my first clue. Josh started coming around a lot. Strategy meetings, message sessions, brand workshops. Rachel loved it. It was her world: mood boards, taglines, color palettes. The two of them would spend hours in our dining room debating whether my slogan should be "Steady Leadership, Strong Future" or "Our Town, Our Voice, Our Frank," which I vetoed on principle. I chalked up their closeness to work. They were both communications people, I was the guy who still printed his emails. It made sense. Then they started having more meetings without me. "I'm grabbing coffee with Josh," Rachel would say, grabbing her keys. "We need to nail down the media plan." "Shouldn't I be in that?" I'd ask. "You'll just say yes to everything," she'd reply. "Let us filter. We'll bring you the best options." She began staying out later. "Josh and I are meeting with some donors," she'd text. "Don't wait up. Fundraising, sure. Campaigns cost money." But her donor meetings started filling up most evenings and half the weekends. At events, the banquets, the club luncheons, the rubber chicken dinners that pass for civic life, Rachel leveled up too. She'd float through the room like she owned it. Folks would introduce her to strangers as the real brains behind the operation, and instead of laughing and pointing at me, she'd smile and say, "Well, I keep him in line." I'd be 3 steps behind, shaking hands, answering questions about sewer lines and school crossings, while Rachel held court at the head table. She started sitting in the place usually reserved for the mayor's spouse during banquets, but something about the way she carried herself shifted. She wasn't just mayor's wife Rachel anymore. She was Rachel, lady of the city, at least in her own mind. At one Chamber of Commerce dinner, a local business owner came up, shook her hand, and said, "We're so lucky to have you leading us." She shrugged delicately and said, "Oh, Frank does what he can. I make sure it looks good." I laughed, because that's what you do. Later that night, when I tried to joke about it, she looked at me over her wine glass and said, "You know it's true. Without me, you're just Frank. Middle-aged guy in an ill-fitting suit." "I was just Frank when you married me," I said. "It seemed to work okay then." "That was cute then," she said. "It's not enough now. We're building a brand." That word again. Brand. I'd thought she was building a life with me. Apparently she'd moved on to brand architecture. The more Rachel leaned into her first lady of the city persona, the smaller I started to feel. At events, she'd be in the center of photos, perched on the arm of a chair, perfectly posed, while I lurked at the edge, tie loosened, name tag slightly askew. I felt less like a mayor and more like a prop, authentic small-town politician set dressing for her social media. It got into my head. I started second-guessing everything. Every speech felt like a performance designed for her approval. Every outfit, every gesture, every unscripted joke, I'd catch myself thinking, "Is this on brand?" And then hate that I even knew the phrase. One night, after a county banquet where Rachel had introduced me as the man I've molded into a leader and people laughed instead of throwing bread rolls in protest, I sat on the edge of our bed, still in my dress shirt, and said, "I'm tired." "Everyone's tired," she replied, scrolling her phone. "That's campaigns." "I feel like a puppet," I said. "And you're the one with your hand up my back." She didn't look up. "That's disgusting," she said. "And dramatic." "I'm serious, Rach," I said. "This doesn't feel like me anymore. I got into this to fix things. Now I barely recognize my own voice in these speeches." "That's because your natural voice is boring," she said, still looking at her phone. "Nobody wants to hear you drone on about asphalt thickness and capital budgets. They want a story. I'm giving you one." "At what point," I asked, "do I get to tell it?" She sighed, put the phone down, and finally looked at me. "Frank," she said, her voice dipping into that slow, patronizing cadence she reserved for idiots and reporters, "without me, you are nobody in this arena. I create your image. I make people pay attention. You want to go back to being the guy who fixed leaky roofs and argued with the zoning board? Be my guest. But if you want to matter, you need me." There it was. Not even softened. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Partly because I was trying not to say something I couldn't take back, partly because I was realizing that maybe I'd already become the thing I was afraid of, a guy whose reflection depended on someone else's lighting. In the weeks that followed, the feeling of being a marionette only got stronger. Josh and Rachel would disappear into closed-door meetings and come out with new strategies I was expected to execute, a town hall with pre-screened questions, a series of glossy mailers with photos of me I didn't remember taking, a spontaneous visit to the farmer's market with a photographer hiding behind the tomato stand. I'm not naive. I know politics is theater. But it was my name on the marquee, and I felt like I didn't have any say in the script. One Tuesday afternoon, I found myself sitting alone in my office at City Hall, the fluorescent lights humming, my calendar packed with things other people had put there, and I felt hollow. Burned out. Used up. I stared at the framed photo on my wall, me and Rachel on inauguration night, my first term, both of us beaming like we just gotten away with something wonderful. Back then, her hand on my arm had felt like partnership. Now it felt like a grip. A thought rose up from somewhere below the exhaustion, steady and stubborn, "I'm the voice of these people. Not her brand." I said it out loud, just to hear it. "I'm the voice of the people," I muttered. "Not her brand." It sounded corny. It also sounded right. If you've ever had one of those moments where something inside you shifts from "I can't" to "I have to," you know the feeling. It wasn't a roar. It was more like a click, as if some internal gear finally locked back into place. The next day, fate, or maybe just office gossip, sent me an ally. It started with a knock on my door. "Come in," I said, expecting Tyler. Instead, it was Emily, one of the city secretary's office staff, a woman in her early 30s, sharp-eyed, organized, the kind of person who knows where all the bodies are buried because she filed the burial permits. "You got a minute, Mayor?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "Sure, I replied. "What's up? Are we out of coffee again? Because if we are, I'll declare a state of emergency." She didn't smile. "It's about Rachel," she said. My stomach tightened. "What about her?" Emily sat down, perched on the edge of the chair like she might bolt at any second. "I don't want to overstep," she said, "but I think you should see something. And I think it should come from me before it comes from someone who doesn't like you as much as I do." I tried to make a joke, "Well, that narrows it down," but it died on my tongue. She took a folder out of her bag and set it on my desk. "These are copies," she said. "I haven't shown them to anyone else yet." I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails and scanned documents. At first, my brain did that thing where it refused to attach meaning to words. Then they came into focus. Payments. Invoices. Memos. A series of transfers from entities tied to my main opponent's campaign, let's call him Carter, because why not, to a consulting firm registered at a P.O. box in the next county. The firm's name, R.D. Strategic Communications. R.D. as in Rachel Daniels. My wife. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice coming out softer than I intended. Emily swallowed. "Rachel has been using our copier after hours," she said. "A lot. She assumes nobody pays attention to who prints what, but the machine logs everything." Tyler asked me to audit usage because costs were up, and I got curious. "Curious how?" I asked, though I already knew. "I recognized one of the letterheads," she said, pointing to a page. "It's from Carter's pack. They've been requesting public records from us, so I've seen their stuff." Then I saw the payee line. Same P.O. box I'd seen on a local business registration last year. I checked the registration. She slid another page over, a printout from the state's corporate database. "Owner, Rachel Daniels." "She's getting paid by Carter," I said, the words landing one by one like bricks. "As what? A consultant?" "Looks like it," Emily said. "Messaging, image consulting, social media strategy." Here she flipped to another page. "This one's an email chain where she sends him a mock-up of a mailer attacking your record on road maintenance. The language matches some of the talking points we've heard on the trail." I stared at the phrase "road to nowhere." Has Frank Daniels failed our infrastructure? In a PDF attached to an email from my wife's account to my opponent's campaign chair. It felt like being punched in the chest and then immediately handed a mirror. "How long?" I asked. "Payments start about 4 months ago," she said. "Right around when Josh came on board." That made a gross kind of sense. Rachel brings in a consultant for me, dials up her involvement with him, and at the same time, quietly forms a shell company to advise my opponent's camp on how to tear me down. They get inside info on my schedule, my messaging, my weak spots. She gets paid. Everyone thinks it's just politics. Everyone but the guy whose name is on the signs in his own yard. I closed the folder. Opened it again. Looked at Emily. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "You could have taken this to Carter. Or the press. Or kept it to yourself." She shrugged, eyes a little wet. "I've worked here 12 years, she said. "I watched you fix up the old rec center instead of letting them tear it down. I watched you sit with Mrs. Hollis at the hospital after her husband died even though it was campaign season. I don't agree with every decision you make, but I do believe you're trying. You deserve to know when someone in your own house is working against you." I nodded, throat tight. "Thank you," I said. It wasn't enough, but it was what I had. "Also," she added, standing, "as a citizen? I'm kinda curious what you're going to do." That made 2 of us. For a day or 2, I did nothing. Shock will do that to you. I walked around City Hall like a man in a dream, smiling at people, signing things, sitting in meetings where Josh droned on about demographic micro-targeting, while my brain replayed the numbers from those invoices. Rachel had always been good at making me feel like I needed her to matter. Now I knew she'd been making money betting against me, too. When anger finally showed up, it brought friends, clarity, and a stubborn sense of responsibility. Because here's the thing, this wasn't just a marital betrayal. If it were, we could have screamed at each other in the kitchen, broken some plates, maybe gone to counseling, maybe divorced quietly like grown-ups. But this touched my job. My office. My duty to the people who'd hired me. I was the mayor. The guy whose name was on the door. If my wife was taking money from the opposition to undermine my campaign while presenting herself as my image architect, that wasn't just messy. That was corruption adjacent. It was a conflict of interest that went way beyond our living room. And in a small town, if you don't clean up your own mess, someone else will come along with a worse broom. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to leak it to some reporter and hide behind sources say. I wasn't going to whisper it at coffee shops and hope it grew into rumor. I'd watched enough scandals from a distance to know that the cover-up always looks worse than the crime. I was going to tell the truth. Myself. In public. With receipts. "Have you lost your mind?" Tyler asked when I told him. "Possibly," I said. "But if I'm going to lose, I'd rather lose honest than win on a lie." We arranged a press conference. That sounds grander than it was. In our town, press conference means inviting the local paper, The regional TV station, the radio host whose studio is half storage closet, plus anyone on Facebook who's curious. I booked the community center, because the council chambers felt too stiff. Told the staff we'd be making an important campaign-related statement. I did not elaborate. In a building that leaks like City Hall, the fact that nobody knew specifics was itself a miracle. The day of the event, I put on my best suit, the one Rachel had picked years ago, which felt like wearing someone else's skin, and looked at myself in the mirror. "Okay, Frank," I said. "You wanted to be the voice of the people? Time to sound like something other than a talking point." People trickled into the room. Folding chairs squeaked. Reporters set up tripods. Emily stood in the back, arms crossed, gaze steady. Tyler hovered near the side wall, looking like he might vomit into a potted plant. Rachel was not there. I hadn't told her. It felt cruel, and also necessary. At the front table, next to the microphone, sat a neat stack of papers, copies of the emails, the invoices, the corporate registration. The folder Emily had given me, now a little dog-eared. The proof. When it was time, I walked up, took a breath, and started. "Good afternoon," I said. "You all know me. I'm Frank. Some of you know me as Mayor Daniels. Some of you know me as the guy who blocked you in the grocery store parking lot last week. I'm here today not as a party's candidate, or as a brand, but as somebody who owes you the truth." That got their attention. "I've been proud to serve as your mayor for the last 12 years, I continued. "When I ran for this job, I promised you transparency and integrity. Lately, I've been feeling like those words have gotten lost in the noise of campaigns and consultants and everything else." I glanced at Tyler. He looked like he wanted to hide under a chair. "Recently," I said, "information came to my attention about financial arrangements involving my campaign, my family, and my main opponent's campaign." You could feel the air thicken. The reporters leaned in. "I learned that my wife, Rachel," I said, and saying her name hurt, "has been receiving payments through a consulting firm she set up, from my opponent's political committee and related organizations. In exchange, she has been providing them with messaging, strategy, and, in some cases, inside information about my campaign." A wave of murmurs rolled across the room. Someone gasped. In the back, Emily's jaw clenched. "I want to be very clear," I went on. "Rachel is responsible for her own choices. I did not know about these arrangements. Had I known, I would have called them out the same day. I take responsibility for any ways my trust has allowed this to happen on my watch." I held up the folder. "These are copies of payment records, emails, and business filings that show the connection between Rachel's firm and my opponent's committee. I am making them public today. After this, they will be available for anyone in this room to review. I am also sending them to the State Ethics Commission for their investigation." Hands shot up. I nodded at the local paper's reporter. "Are you saying," she asked, "that your wife has been effectively working for both campaigns at once?" "Yes," I said. "That's what the paperwork shows." "Is this a stunt because you're behind in the polls?" the regional TV guy asked. "If I were trying to stage a stunt," I replied, "I'd pick one that didn't require me to blow up my own marriage on public access TV. This is me trying to clean up my side of the street." Another reporter: "What does this mean for your party endorsement?" "Ah, yes. The party. The one that had happily benefited from Rachel's talents when she was working exclusively on my stuff. The one whose local insiders had introduced me to Josh in the first place. The one that, if I was a betting man, probably knew more than they'd ever admit about back channels and double dealing." "It means," I said slowly, feeling the click of that internal gear again, "that I'm done letting any machine, red, blue, or otherwise, tell me who I am to you. Effective today, I am withdrawing my candidacy as the endorsed candidate of any party. I will continue this race as an independent." That drew a real reaction. Gasps, whispers, somebody saying "oh, hell" under their breath. I held up a hand. "My loyalty is to this town. Period. Not to a party apparatus in the state capitol. Not to consultants who see us as a stepping stone on their way to bigger things. And certainly not to anyone, family or otherwise, Who thinks they can profit off both sides while you're the one stuck with the consequences? Do you think you can win as an independent? Someone called out. I smiled, for real this time. I don't know, I said. That's up to the people in this room and the people watching at home. What I do know is that if I win, it'll be because you chose me, not because someone in a back room drew a map that said I was the right color. When it was over, I stepped back from the mic, my heart pounding, sweat on my neck. The room buzzed like a kicked beehive. Reporters swarmed the table with the documents. Emily gave me a tight nod. Tyler looked like he needed a drink and a nap. The fallout was spectacular. At first, the party folks scrambled. Local leaders called, some upset, some weirdly grateful, all of them nervous. The state chair left a voicemail that managed to use the words disappointed, concerned, and regret in one sentence without actually saying, "You're blowing up our plans." My opponent, Carter, held his own press conference 2 days later, insisting he had no knowledge that Rachel's firm had anything to do with me. The Ethics Commission opened an inquiry. Leaked emails suggested he'd known about our mutual friend Rachel feeding them messaging ideas. His numbers dropped. Fast. As for Rachel, she packed a bag and left. No big scene. No screaming in the yard. She walked into the house one evening, face pale, eyes tight, and said, "I can't believe you did that." "I can," I said. "It was time." "You could have ruined me," she said. "Rach," I replied, "I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. I just stopped covering for it." She stared at me like I was a stranger. "You'll never win without me," she said finally. "You have no idea how this game works." "Maybe that's okay," I said. "Maybe the game's the problem." She shook her head, grabbed her suitcase, and walked out. I watched her taillights disappear down the street. We canvassed together 3 different elections. A chapter closed without a period. In the weeks that followed, the campaign felt different. Lighter, in some ways. Heavier, in others. Without the party apparatus, I lost access to some things: their voter database, their volunteers, their mail program. Josh vanished like a groundhog who'd seen his shadow. But I also lost the scripts. The constant second-guessing. The sense that I was performing a role someone else had cast me in. We rebooted. Stripped the campaign down to basics: handshakes, living room conversations, town halls where people could actually say what was on their mind without having their questions pre-screened. Tyler dusted off an old spreadsheet of yard sign requests from my first run. Emily, on her own time, helped us set up a simple email list. We printed new signs: Frank Daniels Independent. Our town, not their game. Cheesy? Sure. Honest? Also sure. The opposition, meanwhile, imploded. Carter's campaign, already wobbling from the scandal, took more hits as the Ethics Commission dug in. Donors backed away. One of his key staffers resigned. The party started hinting that maybe they weren't fully invested in this particular race, which is party speak for "we're not throwing good money after bad." Locally, people reacted like people. Some were mad at me for airing dirty laundry. "You don't talk about family in public," more than one person said. I didn't, I'd reply. I talked about my job. Some folks shrugged. "Politics is dirty," they'd say. "You're all crooked." Those hurt, but they already thought that anyway. But a surprising number, more than I expected, if I'm honest, pulled me aside in grocery store aisles and hardware stores and said, "Took guts, what you did," or "about time someone told us the truth." Election day came like they all do, too fast and not fast enough. I voted at the middle school gym like everyone else, feeding my ballot into the machine while Mrs. Donovan from the library handed out "I voted" stickers with the same seriousness she reserves for overdue book fines. That night, we gathered at the community hall. No glitzy ballroom, no party banners. Just some crock pots of chili, trays of cookies, a volunteer DJ, a couple of TVs tuned to the local station, and an anxious pile of supporters who kept pretending they weren't checking their phones every 30 seconds. The early returns showed me trailing. Party-affiliated voters stuck with their team out of habit. But as more precincts came in, the ones with more independents, More people who knew me as Frank from the school board, or Frank from the hardware store, or Frank who stood in my yard and listened when I yelled about storm drains the gap closed. Then flipped. At around 10 p.m. the county clerk called it. I'd won. Not by a landslide, not by a photo finish, by a margin that felt, in every sense, earned. Enough to be decisive, not so much that I could pretend it had been inevitable. I stood up in front of that room full of neighbors, some old friends, some people who'd been mad at me about a permit 6 months earlier, and gave the least polished, most honest speech of my life. I don't have a party behind me anymore, I said. I don't have consultants. I don't have anybody telling me how to stand or which words make you feel things. I have you. And you have me. That's the deal, if you still want it. They cheered. They cried. Someone started chanting Frank. 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 Which I hated and loved at the same time. Later, after the hugs and handshakes and photos and someone spilling chili on my shoe, I walked outside alone for a minute. The November air was cold, the stars were out over our little town like they actually cared. I thought about all of it, the first campaign, Rachel's careful staging, the slow shift from partner to puppeteer, the feeling of my strings being cut and realizing I could still stand. The folder on my desk. The press conference. Her taillights disappearing. The independent under my name on the ballot. And I laughed. Not hysterically. Just a dry little chuckle at the absurdity of it all. My big political origin story, the one I used to tell, was about getting mad at a broken sidewalk. Now, my How I Became Who I Am story includes my wife taking checks from my opponent and me outing it on local TV like some budget version of a prestige drama. You can't make this stuff up. Or you can, but nobody would believe you. Looking back now, with some distance and a little more gray in my hair, it's almost funny. In a dark sitcom kind of way. I used to say politics was about building coalitions. Now I think it's about figuring out who you can look in the eye in the grocery store when it's over, including your own reflection. Rachel was wrong about one thing. I was never nobody without her. I was just a guy who forgot that a little while. A guy who let someone else's idea of a brand climb on his shoulders and steer. Turns out, the only brand that really matters in a town like ours is whether people believe you when you say, "I'll try my best, and I'll tell you when I screw up." I've kept that press conference folder in my filing cabinet. Not because I like revisiting it, but because every now and then, when some lobbyist from the state capitol comes in with a big smile and a bigger check, or some consultant wants to sell me on the latest micro-targeting wizardry, I open that drawer, look at those papers, and remember, I work for the people whose names are on the mailboxes around here. Not for brands. Not for parties. Not for the person who happens to share my last name. If there's a lesson in all this, and voters love a lesson, it's probably this: you can outsource your messaging, but you can't outsource your integrity. And sooner or later, the truth makes for a better story than whatever your consultant came up with. Even if it's the kind of story that, years later, still makes you wince a little and then shake your head and laugh. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.